Algeria is a unique country. The largest country in Africa, it reaches across the Sahara Desert to border Mali and Niger. Yet for more than 100 years, Algeria was officially French. Not merely a French colony, but part of France herself. This is its story, the story of Algiers, a changing capital, of the country's thousands of years of history, of its diversity, from the mountains to the snowfields to the Mediterranean beaches. The rural landscapes, the gentle plains of the Mitija and the rolling hills of Oran province, the city of Oran, the rocks of Constantine, the Ores Mountains, the vastness of the Sahara with its mirages, the desert miracle of Gardaya, the Grand Erg, the Ogar Highlands, and the Tassili Niger. And the city of Sefar, with its 15,000 cave paintings. So we begin our journey across Algeria, seen from above. You can take a plane to Algiers, but you really enter Algeria by sea. Algiers got its name from the Arabic for the islands, after the 4 islands that were once on the edge of the bay. Today, only one of them remains. The city is known as Algiers the White, from its dazzling whitewashed buildings. From the sea, you get an idea of the city's history. Algiers is a mix of imposing buildings that might be from a Paris boulevard. And higher up, the old Ottoman city, the traditional Kasbah. The two old cities vie for the best view of the bay. Algiers is built on the side of a steep hill. To explore it, you have to climb. A grand boulevard sweeps around the town and along the seafront. The arcaded buildings and the ramps leading down to the quay were constructed under Napoleon III. The main post office, built in 1910, is an Algiers landmark. If you can see it, you can work out where you are. It also handles money transfers sent by Algerians working abroad. 4 billion euros a year enters Algeria via its post offices. And another 7 billion comes informally, meaning as cash in everyone's pockets. The high density and the narrow winding streets at least make for togetherness. The former Great Synagogue, built in 1865, is now a mosque. But to this day, it is called the Jamal Lihud, the Jews' Mosque. It's in the former Rue Rondon, now called the Rue Ama Ali. after a militant who died in the War of Independence. The fashionable shopping street, Rue Labi Ben Midi, commemorates a guerrilla leader executed by French paratroopers who tried to make it look like suicide. All around are streets named after other revolutionary martyrs: Saeed Bakel, Ali Boumangel, Mohammed Sadoum, Ahmed Shahib. The names are like a roll call of ghosts. Walking beneath the balconies hung with washing, you overhear conversations and glimpse the daily life up above. Especially in the Casbah, the Algiers of the Ottomans, of the Barbary pirate Barbarossa, of the feasts of the sultans. Yet the Casbah is like a museum in ruins. Its houses are collapsing, one after another. The streets are narrow and full of nooks and crannies. They're so cramped that the garbage is sometimes collected by donkeys, just as it was 600 years ago. The people of the Casbah are a community apart, living among their own. The impenetrability of the Casbah makes it an ideal hideout for rebels and revolutionaries. It was the main venue for the showdown between guerrillas and French paratroops in 1957. After Algerian independence, it became a giant squat for migrants from the countryside. Overcrowding, maladministration, lack of water, poor hygiene, all made it a powder keg once again. In the 1990s, it became a stronghold for Islamist terrorists, who imposed a reign of terror. Today, calm has returned, and the Casbah can decay in peace. But the center of Algiers is no longer the main residential area. The city is spreading out into suburbs. With 4 million people, Algiers has become the biggest city in northwest Africa. Bordering the Casbah is the old French working-class district of Bab el-Oued. 65,000 people live in Bab el-Oued, squeezed together as best they can. In the early 1960s, the French population of Bab el-Oued mounted a last-ditch stand against Algerian independence. That too ended in a showdown with the French army. The satellite dishes provide live football coverage and foreign TV channels. During the civil war of the 1990s, the Islamists banned the dishes. It is said that some people resorted to putting up couscous cookers to try to get a signal. Whether that is true or not, the Islamist grip on Bab el-Oued has since been broken. There are some 8 million school-aged children in Algeria. Thousands of teachers are being hired. Schools and universities are being built. Boys and girls have almost equal access to education. The literacy rate is the highest in Northwest Africa. The average age is 28. The Science and Technology University in Bab el-Zour, outside Algiers, has 35,000 students. Education is a major challenge for a country with so many young people. Another challenge is the question of religion. The Byzantine Basilica of Our Lady of Africa reminds us that we're still very much in the Mediterranean. Affectionately known as Madame Afrique, the church houses a dark-skinned Virgin Mary. Since the end of French rule and the evacuation of the French population, most of the churches have been converted to mosques. But Our Lady of Africa remains. It welcomes believers of every faith. It's even a symbol of tolerance, they say in Algiers. Algeria has around 15,000 mosques, including the third largest in the world. The Great Mosque of Algiers, facing the bay in the district of Mohammedia. Under construction by an army of Chinese workers, the Great Mosque will be a concrete giant. Its minaret will be 265 meters high, the highest in the world. Its prayer hall will hold 120,000 people. Islam is the state religion. It is a traditional Sunni Islam, practiced or at least respected by most of the population. The Islamist challenge of the 1990s failed to turn Algeria into a theocracy and finally petered out. Like the street names, the Martyrs Memorial overlooking Algiers commemorates those who died in the previous struggle, the War of Independence. Anywhere between 300,000 and 1.5 million people died in that war, most of them Algerian civilians. What began as a conflict between nationalist guerrillas and the French army became a civil war between the French and Algerian communities, and between supporters and opponents of independence within both communities. The history of Algeria seems to alternate between occupation and liberation. Along the coast from Algiers is the Royal Mausoleum of Mauritania, dating from 3 BC, the time of the Berber Kingdom. Below the mausoleum, the ruins of Tipaza reflect the influence of the Romans and the power of Byzantium. Then came the conquest of northwest Africa by Muslim Arabs in AD 670. The Arabs came on horseback, a memory that is still very much alive. The art of the fantasia lives on throughout Algeria. Coordinated displays of horsemanship in which riders demonstrate their ability and courage. A fantasia often accompanies weddings. But fundamentally, the horse is a symbol of strength. Families that own horses are more influential. A good horse represents down-to-earth good sense, as against the frivolity of the town. The fantasia inspired many Orientalist painters, as did Algeria itself. The road east from Algiers leads to Tizi Ouzou and Béjaïa, and then on to Annaba, ending at Alcala, on the border with Tunisia. Algeria is huge, 4 times the size of France. The coast road is a hillside route carved into the rock, an invitation to wander and admire. It's a holiday road, the way to seaside towns. It passes the remarkable Cap Carbon lighthouse. Built by the French in 1906, it is said to be the highest lighthouse in the world. Beachgoing is a relatively new custom for Muslim Algerians. In the 90s, the Islamists tried to stamp it out, along with most other leisure activities. But as with the satellite dishes, the Islamists couldn't make the ban stick. People returned to the beaches and brought their families with them. As on any beach around the world, boys go to flirt with girls. But the girls seldom respond. Big brothers are watching, and their parents are vigilant. Algerians also love their cars. Cars are useful to get around in such a large country, but they're also a second home and offer a degree of privacy. And everyone drives, both men and women. It is said that there is one car for every 4 people in Algeria, including babies and pensioners. The holiday road also leads to major ports. Here too, the sea is vital. For many years after independence, Algeria was short of almost everything. But consumption of imports is now soaring. Everything is imported: household appliances, furniture, luxury goods, clothing, food, and all these cars. Only heroes of the revolution were exempt from import taxes, so countless cars were bought by the ghosts of heroes. Industry is gradually starting up again. With iron from the Kunza mines and gas from Hassi Massaoud, Algeria produces steel at El Adjar, close to the Tunisian border. The steelworks was built by the Soviet Union 50 years ago. As it awaits modernization, it struggles to produce enough steel for the country's construction and machinery. This factory could ultimately make the fortune of the Annaba region. It was once the Mediterranean's leading mining area. Annaba really feels like a seaside town, all the more appealing for being old-fashioned. Its name comes from the fruit of the ziziphus tree, which grows throughout North Africa in the Middle East. In the days of French rule, when it was called Bonn, it was an industrial centre renowned for its metalwork.
شرع الله يا الحباب معكم يا جيراني.
As they do today, families came for the sea breeze and cafe terraces. People also came on pilgrimage to the church that overlooks the town. It is the Basilica of St. Augustine, the ancient theologian and doctor of the church, whose mother is said to have been a Berber. He was born in 354 AD in what is now Annaba. Between 2010 and 2013, the basilica was restored with the support of the Algerian and French governments and a gift from Benedict XVI. This Catholic church still has its place in Muslim Algeria. Today's El Kala is the former French fishing port of La Calle. The harbour is dominated by the former church of St. Cyprian, built in 1875 and now a cultural centre. Many Italian fishermen lived in La Calle and would come to the church to pray before putting to sea. They fished for sardines and above all for red coral, the red gold that made the town's name and fortune. The hillside cemetery facing the sea still has an Italian feeling to it. Times have changed, and the Mediterranean has changed too. Algerians still fish for sardines, but the fish are becoming scarce. The fishermen are calling for the reef to be protected. They say coral divers have affected the coral, and along with it, the shoals of fish that fed on the reef. Though Algeria faces the sea, it is not a maritime nation. But it does have a lot of local fishing. As elsewhere in the Mediterranean, fishermen complain about dwindling fish stocks, neighbours who plunder their resources, and a market that underpays them. As a result, the fishing ministry has produced a fishing plan, a program to farm bream, tuna and prawns that will make it possible to feed the country. That is an ambitious goal, for much of Algeria's food remains imported. Let's see what the land looks like. Close to El Kala is a humid zone, vast marshlands, the Gabes Senhaja area. It's a vital zone for the whole region. Water is precious, as is the life it supports. Gabes is a biosphere reserve, a World Heritage Site. It is the country's most productive natural area, with countless animal and plant species. The wealth of Annabah's agricultural lands comes from this humid zone. It grows green beans, fruit, and other vegetables. Everything is done by hand. Almost 11 million Algerians live from agriculture, a third of the population. We return from El Kala to discover the agricultural lands known as the Tell, which stretch as far as Oran on the other side of the country. The Algerians grow oranges in the Matija today, thanks in part to the hard work of the French colonists who drained the land. Most of these fields were once unworkable. Today, around 1 million smallholders share this fertile land. Agriculture is a national priority. 41 million Algerians have to be fed. Today, per capita, Algeria is the world's biggest wheat importer. In a strange reversal of history, the grain comes from France, to a country that previously produced wheat for the French. Times have changed. Algeria has 4 times as many mouths to feed as it used to. But thanks to its oil revenue, Algeria avoided the bread riots that swept much of the Arab world. Before the French arrived, the ruling Ottomans and the local tribes shared the rights to farmland. 100 years of French colonization overturned all that. In Oran province, French settlers produced wine and grain on vast farms near Sidi Bel Abbes. The local tribesmen either had to leave or to become fellahs, poor peasants working for the French. The Oran region and the Mitidja rebelled. The land issue had sowed the seeds of resentment. The fellahs became fellagas, guerrilla fighters. With the coming of independence, the French left. Their estates were broken up. The land remained, growing wildflowers where there had been grapevines. How many people have wondered since whether it could all have been very different? On the Oran Plain, some of the grand houses still appear to be derelict after 50 years. The locals have built around the abandoned buildings. In some cases, little remains of the original property. It has been scavenged or left in ruins. So many people have worked this land. The Fellahs, the nomads, and the French. Generations of so-called settlers were born in Algeria without ever being Algerian, while in France, they were like foreigners. Their fate was much harsher than either side has recognized. Since the 1970s, oil has ruled in Algeria. The Arzu refinery in the Oran region is the third biggest in the country. It processes crude oil from Hassi Messaoud in the heart of the desert. Tankers transport Algerian oil around the world. It is the country's biggest resource by far. The Oran region is also the starting point for a gas pipeline that passes beneath the Mediterranean and surfaces at Almeria in Spain. In a way, it is fitting. Oran has always been the most Spanish city in Algeria. You can sail from Almeria to Oran in a single night. Andalusian sailors set out from Spain to take possession of this bay in 902 AD. It was they who founded the city of Oran. 600 years later, the Spanish built the fort and the district of Santa Cruz. Other voyages followed, and Oran became Spanish for 300 years. Today, it is the capital of Ray, a variety of indigenous folk music with its roots in the bars of Oran. Oran is only half the size of Algiers, but companies flock to it for meetings and conferences. It's not New York, but it is known as Little Paris.
Je suis fidèle نبغى نتخلص سكر ها لا ديرش عليهم Je suis fidèle نبغى نتخلص سكر ها لا ديرش عليهم ها كانوا غايرين راني معلقة ماني متزوج ماني مطلق وياه ها كل يوم شالقة متموش تطلع كورنيش هيا علي
Oran has a racy reputation by Algerian standards. It's a party town where people talk loudly and say outrageous things. The atmosphere is youth-oriented and dynamic. Business is booming. Part of the Spanish legacy is the bull ring in the center of town. It was once used for sacrificing sheep for the Muslim festival of Eid al-Adha. Oran was 60% European under the French. Yet in the 1830s, it was also the stronghold of the Emir Abdelkader as he led the resistance to the French conquest. As in Algiers, the streets have been renamed after heroes of Algerian nationalism. The Romano-Byzantine Sacred Heart Cathedral is now a library. For the former French population, Oran is one of the most nostalgic places. Seeing the old house, the old neighborhood, the familiar smells, remembering the names of streets and old friends. A Franco-Algerian community program has helped thousands of former residents to revisit their history and relive their memories. The city's historic square may strike them now as quite small, but the Opera House and the familiar buildings around it remain. The real heart of Oran today is probably its football stadiums. The whole of Algeria seems soccer crazy. West of Oran are the coastal villages of Hazouet and Benissaf. The colourful houses and churches are a modest legacy of history. The market halls in the town centre are still used today. Tlemcen was once the seat of power in the region. In the Middle Ages, the town was the capital of central northwest Africa. The Mansoura Mosque, founded in 1303 and now in ruins, is mentioned by the medieval historian Ibn Khaldun. Built around a central courtyard, it is typical of the Arab Andalusian style of northwest Africa. We leave the Oran Plain and head for Kabylia, Algeria's mountains, and Tizi Ouzou. After that, we will head south to Constantine, the Aurès Mountains, and the desert.
ميكوني وانا ليش ميكوني وانا دين وجديد غادي يسفروا يا صلاحنا تدوانا ورد قارتانا العطر بدا سياح والجن استعروا والناس ديد والناس يا كديد والناس
Algeria is a unique country. The largest country in Africa, it reaches across the Sahara Desert to border Mali and Niger. Yet for more than 100 years, Algeria was officially French. Not merely a French colony, but part of France herself. This is its story, the story of Algiers, a changing capital, of the country's thousands of years of history, of its diversity, from the mountains to the snowfields to the Mediterranean beaches. The rural landscapes, the gentle plains of the Mitidja and the rolling hills of Oran province, the city of Oran, the rocks of Constantine, the Aurès Mountains, the vastness of the Sahara with its mirages, the desert miracle of Gardaya, Grand Erg, the Ogar Highlands, and the Tassili Niger. And the city of Sefar, with its 15,000 cave paintings. So we begin our journey across Algeria, seen from above. We leave the Oran Plain and head for Kabylia, Algeria's mountains, and Tizi Ouzou. After that, we will head south to Constantine, the Aurès Mountains, and the desert. Kabylia, and we enter the Jojura Hills. After the open plains, it looks like a natural fortress.
يفرح والميكوني ولا يكمكوني ولا.
In 1956, 2 years into the Algerian War of Independence, the nationalists held the Soumam Conference in this region, under the very noses of the French. Among the olive and fig trees of the Soumam Valley, they declared there would be no ceasefire short of full independence, a condition they stuck to through thick and thin. The villages are usually set on the heights to guard against any threat from outsiders. Each rocky spur is inhabited. The houses don't have many windows. The winter can be cold. Arabic is spoken here, but the local language is Kabyle. It's a Berber language similar to Tamashek, spoken by the Tuaregs of the desert. To the west, on the high plateau, we come to an incredible Roman site, Kuikul, modern Jamila. This silent city reflects how important it was to the Romans to control the mountains. The Kabyles were then the Numidians. The Romans called them barbarians, and the name stuck as Berbers. Kuikul dates from the time of the Emperor Nerva in the 1st century. It's a true mountain city, built on an outcrop 900 meters high at the intersection of 2 valleys. It was probably a wealthy city. Today, it is a UNESCO World Heritage Site. The abandoned city is a reminder that the Romans never truly conquered the Berbers. The Romans left, the Berbers stayed. To the south are the remains of another Roman city, Timgad, founded by Trajan in the year 100 to house veterans of the 3rd Augustan Legion. Every building evokes the power of Rome, the triumphal arch, the Eastern Gate, and the Western Gate restored by Marcus Aurelius. The streets were paved with large slabs of rectangular limestone, and the floors of houses with magnificent mosaics. Timgad was destroyed by raiders from the Ores Mountains at the end of the 5th century. Its stone was used for building throughout the region. But even in ruins, this site in the heart of Algeria is unique. It's an open-air lesson in urban design. Timgad exemplifies the grid pattern on which many modern cities are based. The city of Constantine embodies this Roman legacy. Originally the Numidian capital of Cirta, it became a Roman fortress, only to be destroyed during a Roman civil war. In 313 AD, under the Emperor Constantine, the stronghold was rebuilt as a Roman city and renamed in his honor. Today, Constantine stands high on its rock, with a viaduct and many bridges linking it to the land below. It's known as the City of Bridges, or the City of the Ancient Rock. From 1838 to 1962, Constantine was the capital of the French département of the same name. It remains the third biggest city in Algeria. A city of culture, Constantine is truly a jewel in Algeria's crown. On the right is the former French cathedral. The dome is modelled on Brunelleschi's in Florence. Constantine is also a city of ulamas, Muslim theologians who study the Quran and prophetic tradition. The Emir Abdelkader Mosque hosts an Islamic university. Not far from Constantine is the resort town of Hammam Mascoudine. It's a spa town with very hot waters laden with carbonate that form petrified waterfalls. Known as the Bath of the Damned, these waters have treated skin diseases and respiratory ailments for centuries. Further south, the Aurès region begins. It's the land of the Shawi people. The Shawi are Berbers. Like the Kabyles, the Shawi are people of character. In 1954, the uprising against the French began in these deep gorges with an ambush on a bus. The roofy canyon makes an ideal maze for guerrilla warfare. The Romans and the Arabs in their time also came up against the Shawi. To defend themselves against invaders, they built homes deep within the rocky crevasses. Since then, time seems to have stood still. The Shawi became stonecutters and polishers, a craft as hard and unforgiving as the arid land. The nomadic Berbers and the scorched earth are reminders that the Sahara is not far away. The desert seems to advance inexorably. But here is an incredible experiment, a barrier against the desert. Hasibaba, a green belt planted in the 1970s. A monumental achievement or an act of folly? No one yet knows. But millions of trees were planted, a whole forest of Aleppo pines, resinous trees that thrive in arid soil. The green belt was intended to encircle the Sahara. But the dream is threatened by the pine processionary caterpillar, which devours the pines. So what is the encroaching desert really like? We enter the desert at It's literally an opening in a rampart. The wall of the Mzab Mountains. Beyond Biskra, the landscape changes. It's a vast field of sheep. This desert steppe, renowned for its flocks, stretches over 200 kilometers west to Jaffa. People come from all over Algeria to buy a sheep for the feast of the sacrifice, Eid el-Adha. The most highly prized breed is named after a village on the plain, Ouled Jalal. More than 4 million sheep are sold for sacrifice every year. For a 10-year-old boy, his first sheep is a milestone. This region was once covered in halfa grass, but overgrazing has depleted the land. The summer is very hot. From this point on, the traveler has to watch his water and fuel very carefully. In front of us stretches the largest hot desert in the world, bigger than the whole of Australia. On the road ahead lie El Wed, Gardaya, El Minaya, Timimoun, Tamanrasset, Janet. 1,600 kilometers through the desert. The Trans-Sahara Highway is your lifeline. If you leave the road, you're lost. The desert here is not really sand, but rocks. An endless expanse of rocks stretching as far as the horizon. As the sun rises, the temperature climbs too. The horizon blurs and the landscape becomes hazy. It's 35 degrees in the shade. The heat deforms the light, creating strange forms, mirages. They are deadly traps for any wayward traveler. As we come into the El Wed oasis, our first stop in the desert, there are signs of a dream project. The dream of making the desert arable. Potatoes are planted here. All that's needed is water. The Sahara has vast stores of water deep in the ground, the legacy of a distant past. It's fossil water, which the rare desert rains attempt to replenish. The battle against the sands is unwinnable. Agriculture at El Wed is a modern-day mirage. As the water is pumped up, it becomes too salty, and so the fields have to be moved constantly. Originally, El Wed survived with date palms and subsistence farming. But 1 million trees have already died, asphyxiated. Even worse, in some places, the water has been polluted by human waste. El Wed is a large town. The city of 1,000 domes is home to over 100,000 people. Tourism attracts even more. With the installation of running water in homes, the deep-seated water reserves show signs of depletion. The new town of El Wed confronts the realities of the deep desert south. You can see rain in the desert. The dunes glow with strange colors. The raindrops slide into the sand, and so there is some water here. Even further south, we reach one of the desert's most beautiful cities, Gardia, an 11th century citadel on the edge of the Grand Erg, or Sand Sea. Gardia is the center of a group of 5 walled towns known as the Mzab Pentapolis. According to legend, it owes its name to Daya, a beautiful young girl who was abandoned in a cave. Gardia means Daya's cave. The perfection of the city is fascinating. The Mozabites were originally merchants who adhered to strict Muslim codes. Children didn't begin school until the age of 6. They were educated within the community. But public schooling is now obligatory for everyone, even in the middle of the desert. With an extraordinary unity, the town overlooks a centuries-old palm grove that provides fruit and vegetables and shade during hot weather. It's an island of life in the great Saharan sand sea. Gardia's secret is water. It's over 1,000 years old, and irrigation techniques were developed here. Each oasis has a network of channels fed by wells or underground tunnels called fogaras. Each channel pours water into a basin. The flow rate is carefully measured before the water is redistributed among the various gardens. People here don't share the land, they share water. A law imagined by these men of the desert. Life here is a challenge for both man and beast. Both have adapted to the environment. Many species wait for nightfall to venture out, to avoid the heat or to go unseen by predators. Those without a choice must have extraordinary gifts to survive. After Gardaya, we head into the Great Sand Sea, a region of sand dunes a third the size of France. The Grand Erg moves constantly as the wind moves the sand. It's a hard barrier to cross for the men of the desert. Caravans have to make their way from one rare waterhole to the next. After Gardaya, it's vital that we reach El Minaya and Timmy Moon. We know we're approaching El Minaya when we see its fortress, known as a Qasar. El Minaya, an oasis with 100,000 palm trees. The Qasar is typically Berber. It protected the population from raiders. The agriculture is specifically Saharan on 3 levels. Cereals and vegetables grow on the ground. Above are fruit trees, particularly orange trees, and these are shaded from the sun by date palms. El Minaya is a beautiful oasis, but its most incredible secret is on the edge of town. A lake. In the midst of the desert, we find ourselves facing a vast expanse of water. The water is not drinkable. It's too salty even for bathing. But it attracts birds migrating from Europe to Africa. Since time immemorial, pink flamingos and storks have stopped off in this humid zone in the middle of the desert. Somehow, they know where it is. Their very lives depend on it. Further south, we come to a Qasar in the Dra Valley. There was no doubt a palm grove here at one time. The walls are of stone and have stood up to the desert winds. This Qasar is a mystery. It's said to be the last of the Jewish caravanserais. It was over 1,000 years ago when Jewish nomads last traveled through the desert. Since then, the Qasar has gradually fallen into oblivion. Everything is here in this desert, buried in the sand. On the road to Timimun, in the middle of nowhere, we're sure the desert is sterile. But when you know where to look, you can even find truffles. These desert mushrooms are a gift provided by the meager autumn rains. Timimun is an oasis of red clay owing to the iron oxide in the soil. The architecture here inspired Timbuktu and Janneh across the border in Mali. Timimun has recently begun to attract Algerian tourists. The Algiers middle classes even build holiday homes here. We enter by the Sudan Gate. Black Africa is not far away. Timimun is at a crossroads and is therefore a market town. It's said that the Sahara's finest draperies were woven here. But with globalization, the material tends to come from China. Like the sand in the Grand Erg, time erases history. After Timimun, the road crosses a reg, a desert pavement of rock fragments. Geologists' trucks have left their mark here in pursuit of oil. But these tracks lead to nowhere in particular. Instead, we take the road to Tamanrasset, or Tam, Algeria's southernmost town. Tam begins with a mirage of football on artificial grass. The town now has a university with 2,000 students from throughout the region. The town is betting on the future. Tamanrasset is changing, but it will always be at a high altitude, with cold winters and burning summers. It is a crossroads town for the Tuaregs. It takes several days for them to reach it from any direction. Kil-Adja Tuaregs come from Tersili Naja, Kelatram from Gao, and Kelayir from Agadez and Timia. Convoys enter and leave constantly. People come to Tam for supplies. They speak Tamashek. They listen to the news and gossip. We leave Tamanrasset, bound for the Hogar and Tersili Naja, looking for the lost city of Sefar. The regional Tuaregs are the Kel Ahagar, which means the people of the Hogar. Many families have abandoned nomadism and settled on the outskirts of Tamanrasset. The Tuaregs are nomadic animal farmers and sometimes merchants. They own nothing or very little. Some land, goats, dromedaries. It's a matriarchal society. The women own the tents and the few pieces of furniture. Every bit of wood is carefully saved to use in cooking on the desert sand. The Hogar begins here, a huge plateau over 2,000 meters high and studded with craters. The whole history of the Earth is here. Hundreds of volcanoes like Atakor have raised 4 billion-year-old granite to the surface. The bedrock has been pulverized into cliffs, outcrops, and crags. There isn't a sound. No noise comes to disturb this place. From here, the eye turns towards Asakrem, the legendary plateau that was home to a French hermit, the Blessed Father Charles de Foucault. He was a soldier, an explorer, and then a priest who defended secularism, women, the role of Islam, universal education, and the abolition of slavery. He lived with the Berbers and devoted most of his work to Tuareg culture, compiling the first Tamashek dictionary. Charles-Eugène de Foucault de Pontbriand was martyred in these mountains in 1916. Up until the end, he was fascinated by what he saw from his hermitage. The Sahara gave him a glimpse of creation. Crossing this desert is a strange experience. You walk by yourself, but you're not alone. Every step is a dialogue. You experience the surprising nature of the sand, the texture of the rocks. You follow the curving trail, become part of the wadis, the shadows of the acacia trees. The desert is a secret world which speaks only to those who pass through it. The Tijlmust is the only defense against the biting desert winds and sun. Draping this turban cum veil is an art. The color is a code. White is a sign of respect. Respect for those who offer their hospitality. The custom is to drink 3 green teas and talk over the latest news from your route. The first tea will be as bitter as death, the second mild like life, and the third as sweet as love. These are the certitudes for the free men who place one foot before the other. Our own steps lead us to the Tassili Naja, a sandstone plateau over 1,000 meters high, eroded and sculpted over time. For millions of years, the ground was furrowed by water. Now there is desert, the wind wears down and polishes the rock. Daytime heat and nocturnal cold split the stone. Alone in this vast expanse, we see the earth transform. We drink from pools in the wadis, being careful not to drink at the same time as the goats. We are so far from Algiers, in a land that seems as big as a continent. We also see mouflons, wild sheep better adapted to the terrain than goats. They seek water and plants to graze on at dawn and dusk. They're at greatest risk from man when close to the geltas, the natural pools in the rock. The species is endangered, and these regions provide a refuge. The only humans you encounter are dead, in tombs that date back to Neolithic times. The oldest go back around 6,000 years. Only men were buried here, lying on their side, their heads towards the east. We enter the biggest open-air museum of the Neolithic age. You have to come here to believe it. Sefer is the biggest cave-dwelling site in the world. A city of stone. The wind has created avenues, squares, and streets. Sefer has been on the World Heritage List since 1982. Not for the extraordinary creation of the winds, but for what it conceals. "15,000 paintings and engravings decorate the walls of this natural city. It is one of the biggest collections of prehistoric cave art in the world. You discover visual accounts of wars, conquests, and lost civilizations. And you find that this desert was not always so dry. It was once a savanna, a land of giraffes, buffalo, and rhinoceri. 15,000 artworks recounting 6,000 years of climate change, animal migration, and the evolution of human life in the remote Sahara, like a great book of the desert. A tale with its share of mystery, starting with these strange beings that appear in certain drawings, with a form neither animal nor quite human. Few travellers venture beyond Safar. Hardly anyone comes this far. In the far south of Algeria, we glimpse the red desert. We behold the infinite beauty of this world, never to be forgotten. And we remember all the people who have welcomed us. We take with us a memory of all their faces. At the end of our journey, through Algeria from above.